have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Welcome to Candid Conversations. I'm Monica May, co-chair of the Orange County Mayor Jerry L. Deming's Martin Luther King Initiative. From time to time, we have discussions on topics that are pertinent to our community here in Orange County. Today, we'll be discussing what's called ACEs. ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences and how they affect us all. And we have put together a very esteemed panel. Dr. Candace Jones, who knew she wanted to be a doctor at an early age and follow in her mother's footsteps. She was a nurse. Now, Candace was a student at Morehouse School of Medicine, and she said she got a little derailed along the way, but then she realized that what she really wanted to do was be committed to the underserved, and she took flight from there. Her purpose and intention is to continue to work throughout her career with children who are underserved. And whenever I have questions about pediatrics, I go to my kid doctor because she is that friendly kid doctor, and she breaks it down so well. Alongside Dr. Candace Jones today is Rachel Allen, a lifelong educator, a dear friend as well, and a practitioner who loves to support others to practice and educate for peace and justice in their work and personal lives. And in fact, she is the curator and director of the Peace and Justice Institute on Valencia's campus here. And she's also been invited to speak at the United Nations a couple of years ago to share the work of the Peace and Justice Institute. So, ladies, I want to really delve deep into this ACEs. We've talked about it, and there is a book that outlines ACEs very clearly.
It's Nadine Burke Harris's book called The Deepest Well.
And that was the first time I had ever heard about childhood experiences and how they can really shape and derail someone later in life. So let's put a definition to ACEs.
Absolutely. First, thank you for having me, Monica, today.
Absolutely.
So adverse childhood experiences are any type of traumatic events that happen in children from 0 to 17 years of age. And we know that we need to know about this everywhere because it has such impact in the growing brain and developing body of a child, but it has long-lasting impact into adulthood and even to the end of your life. It can shorten your lifespan, causing many of our chronic health conditions, mental health conditions. It even has impact in learning and behavior for children. So it really matters and it really impacts our greater society, and we can prevent it. And we can heal from this trauma. And so it would behoove all of us to know about it, to do the work, and make a better, more resilient community.
And speaking of that better and more resilient community, you have started a community really that does the work that way as well, creating resilience.
Absolutely, because when we learned about the ACEs test and what happens to young people who suffer from ACEs, which frankly is the majority of us, 60% of us have experienced one or more adverse childhood experience, we realized the implications for that in terms of educating and growing a resilient community, a healthy, strong community. Because what happens, what we find out is with an increase in the number of adversities a child experiences, it impacts the brain development and will oftentimes impact their own behavior to themselves, how they treat themselves, and then how they treat others. We learned from the initial study that when children are really struggling, maybe with depression or pain or suffering from trauma, they might do something like self-medicate with alcohol or marijuana or even food. And this is how we realize that we can harm ourselves in an attempt to heal from the trauma that we're experiencing.
And some of the traumas that we're talking about could be being left alone as a child in a dark place. It could be not having food. It could be, does bullying count?
Well, we know there are many ACEs. The original ACE study back in 1998 showed 3 types of ACEs, 3 categories of ACEs, and they would fall under physical abuse, sexual abuse, household dysfunction, and neglect. And so household dysfunction can be many things, you know, having parents divorce, witnessing domestic violence, having a parent in the home who had mental illness or substance abuse or who was incarcerated. And then since that original study, research has gone on, and it has been that study has been replicated across many states, across the nation. And we know that there are realms of ACEs. There are community ACEs, so violence, lack, what we call those social determinants of health in those areas. And then also what we call climate. Well, think about Ian, the hurricane. Think about COVID, the impact and the trauma it has caused to children and their families. And so it is a wide spectrum of traumas that can occur, and that really is personal for each individual on how they experience that trauma and the effect it can have on their life.
And there is a test that we talked about, and so we're going to talk about that a little later. But can your ACEs change? Can you have a certain score one day and then say you remember something else that happened and you take that test another time? Can your ACEs score change?
Well, I think the more we become self-aware, I think that does happen. And it's just that we might realize that we developed very strong coping skills to deal with things that maybe were, well, in some ways unacceptable for a child, like growing up with neglect or a certain kind of abuse that maybe we didn't realize that was even happening to us. And sometimes it's in adulthood when we learn about these things that we realized, well, that happened to me. And I think the benefit to being able to be honest with ourselves, and that happened to me. You know, when I got sober 28 years ago and had a lot of coping mechanisms that weren't helpful to me as a woman, as a professional woman. But it was until I faced what had happened to me as a child that I learned how to address some of the behaviors in my adult life that were actually not benefiting me at all.
So transparency is probably the key element to recovering from your ACEs. Because like you said, more than 60% of us walking this earth are struggling with some type of ACEs. None of us were born into perfect solitude. You know?
And I think for me, when we had Dr. Vincent Validi come to Orlando in 2019, and he was part of the initial study, and when we learned about this work, and Nadine Burke-Harris, who wrote The Deepest Well, I mean, the biggest aha was this idea of not keeping secrets anymore.
That's what's so important.
Yeah, that if I keep the secrets, it's like I keep all this blocked in me. But as soon as I can tell the truth and shed light on the alcoholism in my family, the sexual abuse that's in my family generationally, the suicide, I mean, this is real. This is my family. The drug addiction, this is my family. And I'm a professional working woman. People might say, well, we would never know.
Right.
We wouldn't know. But I'm so grateful that I had a mother who about 35 years ago decided to face her life and get sober and help me to realize that I could face my life and that together we could start to end this, what is passed down generationally from parent to child, and we could interrupt this intergenerational trauma and raise up healthier children and have a healthier family.
This is amazing. When we come back, we're going to talk more about what that ACEs study looks like. This is Candid Conversation on Orange TV. Welcome back to Candid Conversations. It's a conversation that we do with the Orange County Mayor Jerry L. Demings Martin Luther King Initiative. I'm Monica May, your host, and we're talking about ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, how they show up, what does it look like? We've already had the discussion of how it can affect a person, and we also now want to get to the point of, so how do we test for this? What does it look like? Can your pediatrician, can your doctor test you for it? Can you test at home? So let's go back and find out, where do we get this ACEs test from?
That's a great question, and all of those places are options.
Okay.
Absolutely. As a pediatrician, and my hope is that all pediatricians will do this one day, and there are initiatives to do so. I screen all of my patients for ACEs when they have their yearly physicals, and that way it's not a reactive thing when the child comes in and the parent has concerns about something they're doing or not doing. And so we just screen. As a pediatrician, we do lots of screening. Depression, we check for everything. And
ADHD,
so right.
everything, yeah.
So it's easy to add that in. And so we do the ACE questionnaire. I use the PEARLS tool, and we let the family do that screener and then talk about what it means for their family. And if there are symptoms of trauma and there are ACEs in the children, we trudge a path forward and discuss what we can do to help them heal and prevent further ACEs.
So if someone has a high ACE score and they learn about this in their peds office or in their doctor's office, I know it's surprising, shocking, but what do they do next? Is there maybe social workers that can come in and give some type of intervention? What can be done so that these ACEs don't prevent us from thriving?
You know, honestly, Monica, most parents, most caregivers know about the ACEs. They just didn't connect the dots. And it's like an aha moment.
Interesting.
You go, oh yeah, I knew that probably harmed them, or I knew that was a problem, but I didn't connect that the reason he's having trouble behaviorally at school, or she's having this, or he's maybe having difficulty learning, or ADHD could be connected to this trauma that we've all experienced. And so that's one thing. And then if this child is having these symptoms of trauma, poor behavior, emotional dysregulation, maybe aggressive or angry or irritable, looking like ADHD, those are symptoms of traumatic stress, especially in the setting of having ACEs. Then we need to come up with a plan, right? Ways to address that, to heal that trauma, to prevent further trauma. And many times working with the family, we figure out what's best for them. Yes, one of those pieces could be trauma-focused therapies. There are many. Another piece could be family counseling, so that we're strengthening parenting skills to work better with the child. It may be a letter to the school to do some work in the areas of learning or accommodations in the classroom. There are so many things that we can do, but most importantly, I tell parents I help them leave with information to build a safe, stable, nurturing environment for their child, and a safe, stable, nurturing relationship with their child. Those relationships and that connection is key moving forward. And
that lets them know that this is not the end of the world. Because your ACEs score doesn't have to define you.
Right.
No, and as Dr. Jones is talking, I wanted people to know that it's important that the pediatricians are screening, but the other things that are happening in our community, like working with the schools and the principals and the educators, because as our schools become, the word right now is trauma-informed.
Yes.
If our schools and teachers are trauma-informed and aware, when a parent comes upon the recommendation of a pediatrician, the schools, if we tell them what's going on, they are growing in their capacity to be able to respond appropriately. Because oftentimes a child in a classroom who's experiencing trauma at home might present as just a poorly behaved child, or might get very withdrawn and disengaged to where we might think they don't care, they're not interested. That may not be the case at all. So as principals and teachers in schools become aware of understanding ACEs and trauma, we can all be the wraparound supports to help a child move through this, because healing is absolutely possible.
Healing is so necessary too. One of the things that you said earlier is that you and your mom at the same time decided that you could do better. You could move forward and away from alcoholism.
Well, absolutely, because ACEs in a family are not usually just impacting one person. It impacts the whole family system.
Yes.
So as we recognize there's trauma for a child, the adult is probably also experiencing that. So again, giving up being secretive about it, and the shame. There is shame associated with drug addiction in a family, or eating disorders, or sex addiction, all the things that we might want to just hide. But it's the secrecy, I think, that can be really imperil a family. So if we can find people we can trust and to begin to tell the truth, and a pediatrician is a great place to start, right? A doctor or a friend, because what we know the healing begins is when we start to tell the truth, and then we have some support around us. So a community of support, other parents, a teacher at school, if there's a pastor or a religious leader, somebody to help buffer the trauma. I think adults need buffering adults around them, but we know that for children, for children, it's just a well-regulated or a buffering adult, it's called. But for me to be that as a parent for my child, for me to be the buffer and to be a well-regulated adult, I mean, frankly, it took me facing my own problems and getting better before I would have the capacity to really nurture a child well. And there's no shame to that. That's what I just want to say. I don't have shame. Now, in the beginning, when I got sober, did I tell everybody I was getting sober? No.
Because everybody didn't know you had a problem.
Yeah, and I did feel some shame. I mean, I felt a lot of shame.
Sure.
But today, if somebody tells me, Rachel, I'm 6 months sober, or I'm a year sober, or whatever it is, addiction, or whatever thing we're giving up that maybe is harming us, I feel so happy for them. I celebrate for them because I know the ripple effect on their relationships, their family, everybody, their work life. It's all going to get better as we face this adversity that's in our life or was in our childhood.
This discussion on ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, is going to uncover, I think, a lot more, especially in the Black and Brown community. We're talking today to two experts, a pediatrician and a social justice and just an advocate for our community, and a person who has struggled with her own set of ACEs. And we all admit that we have taken the test and have some pretty high scores. This is a conversation that needs to be had in the home, in the school, in the church, just in our community. And when we come back, we're going to really uncover when you hide, what that does, how it affects your health, how it affects relationships. We're talking about ACEs, and then we're going to uncover what PACEs actually looks like. This is Candid Conversations on Orange TV. Welcome back to Candid Conversations, and thank you for staying with us. I'm Monica May, one of the co-chairs of the Orange County Mayor Demings MLK initiative, and we wanted to have a conversation that would stick with you, something that you would say, let me go back and watch that again. Let me do my own research, and let me figure out what ACEs is all about. Adverse childhood experiences. We're learning now that in communities of color especially, there's been just an uptick, or just a disparity, I would say, of critical illnesses such as the ones that we have, the high blood pressure, the diabetes, cancer even, and heart disease. And they're saying now that there's a relationship with ACEs. Go figure. Tell me about that.
Right. We know in our learning about ACEs, there's a field of epigenetics, or the way our DNA is read and transcribed is altered by the toxic stress from the childhood trauma.
So are you saying that toxic childhood experiences can affect my health?
Can
in
affect your
that
DNA,
way? Oh
can
my
affect your
gosh.
DNA. When
My
a
gosh.
child experiences these trauma and they are not buffered, as Rachel mentioned, they don't have that support, the healthy relationships, the safe environments, the things that they need to support them, then this stress becomes toxic, and that's what does the damage. The body keeps the score. And our genes are also affected. The brain, all body systems, and our genes, the way it does what it does, is affected. And once you start doing that, these alterations can be passed down through generations. And so we know that communities of color have had lots of trauma, historical trauma, if we're being very honest. And these epigenetic changes have been passed down through generations. And so this can explain some of the disparity around rates of high blood pressure, cancer, diabetes, stroke, all of these things. And so it's not just poor personal responsibility and poor habits. Some of this is in our DNA and in our genetic makeup.
With having this information, being armed now, being transparent, getting over the shame of what's going on behind closed doors, how can we shift this narrative?
Well, I want to talk about healing because when my mother faced her life and faced alcoholism and the history of trauma in her family generationally, and when my brother and I needed help, she was there for us. We began on that personal healing level and the family healing level. But when we're talking about what Dr. Jones is talking about, think about the work that we've done in our community around Ocoee and the history of trauma in Ocoee in 1920. But look at the healing work our community has done to face the truth about that so that we can be honest and begin to have racial healing and reconciliation. This is all a part of that bigger picture of moving toward wellness, resilience, peace, is facing the truth in my family, not lying any longer about what happened in my family, facing the truth in our community, not lying about how we treated African Americans, Black people, or Indigenous people, people of color, and beginning that healing process. Because the good news is healing is possible. I can change my brain with how I go about taking care of myself. My brain can be rewired with mental health practices, nutritional practices, exercise, good sleep, all these things. And I think we're seeing in our community that we can have community level healing as well, if we're honest with each other and begin to treat each other in ways that are nurturing and buffering.
We hear the words now, PACEs. We put a P in front of that. What does that P stand for?
So the P is positive.
Okay.
It's, ACEs are a part of my history, but it's not my destiny. And as Rachel
score.
mentioned, right, as Rachel mentioned, we can heal, we can overcome adversity, and we can have a bright future towards, a better community and in our lives. And so positive childhood experiences. If you think about it like a fulcrum, you're born with a certain level of resilience, and depending on it, we can push resilience towards positive childhood experiences, or we can not build resilience and be stuck in those adverse experiences. And so there are many ways that we can equip families, we can equip communities to build more resilience and to push that fulcrum towards positive childhood experiences, and all of that heals ACEs and gives people the skills they need to overcome adversity and make things better. Yeah.
So it sounds as if what was a totally negative, ACEs, oh my gosh, when you talk about trauma, and then turning it around to make sure that we first understand it. Well, first of all, that it exists.
Right.
Exactly.
Let's face up to the trauma that we faced.
Yes.
All right, it happened. All right, not to say that we're fleshing it away and whatever, but we're going to manage it and we're going to move forward from it. And we have to understand that everybody has struggled with it. And we know that for us to not talk about it and not to push toward healing can be traumatic for our bodies and traumatic for us mentally.
Right.
Okay, that is why a discussion like this was so necessary for us to have, because the longer we keep hiding what's going on with ourselves, let's start with ourselves first. Be open with how you're feeling. Be open with the experiences that you've had. And when you need to, get some help. Talk with your child's pediatrician to find out where you might be able to go. Read up, Google it, learn more about what's impacting you. Because if we don't begin to discuss what has happened in our past, it's going to adversely affect our future. And it's going to affect our health. And it's going to affect the next generation, because traumatic exposure, if it's not taken care of, is just going to be repeated. Right. And that's traumatic. Yeah. That is traumatic. So ACEs, online, can we take this test?
Yes, you can definitely Google the questionnaire.
Okay.
Pediatricians may use different ones. There's different questionnaires that they may use. So there's definitely, you can do it on your own, get your score, take it to your doctor, and you can find pediatricians that are screening, or come see me. We'll screen. We'll talk about it. Absolutely.
How do we find you?
Oh, sure. I'm at Edgewater Pediatrics, or you can go to my website, drcandicemd.com.
Okay.
Sure.
How do we find you, Rachel?
Well, I would hope that anybody who's interested in this conversation and helping transform our community into one of resilience and being trauma-informed and hope and healing would join the Creating a Resilient Community Network.
Good.
And so that's where you can find me, at the CRC Network, at the Peace and Justice Institute. And because together, I think all of us can work toward this change. Knowledge is power, and this knowledge can really help us to heal and create a resilient community.
I always add on, when people say knowledge is power, it sure is, but it's what you do with it that makes it so powerful. That's what I always add on to that. So ACEs.com maybe?
So
ACEs?
You can just Google the ACEs questionnaire.
All right. And again, don't be afraid to talk about it. Right. And if your doctor doesn't know anything about it, find someone else who does. And understand that all of us have experienced some amount of trauma in our lives. It's how we manage it and how we move forward. The big deal is you gotta talk about it. You really do. Dr. Candice, thank you so much for being on. I tell you, she's the kid doctor that can really explain everything. Thank you again. Thank you. And Rachel, thank you for doing the work that you do with ACEs, with PACEs, and just creating a resilient community. Thank you for sharing how to reach out to you. You've done this for police departments, you've done it for organizations, and thank you for continuing that good work. And thank you for watching. We hope that you have a more informed outlook on what ACEs is. Adverse childhood experiences, they affect all of us. It's what we do with the information now. Now that you have it, find out more about it on your own. You can Google it, but you can also take this test on your own. Just look for the ACEs questionnaire online, take that, bring the results back to your doctor. We'd be really, really, really curious to find out how they can guide you. Again, thank you so much for watching. I'm Monica May, Candid Conversations on Orange TV.
I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today